Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here as the token millennial. The two token millennials, excuse me. So now that I know I'm supposed to be talking about action, we'll talk about some action. So I want to do a little bit call and response in the beginning, just make sure people are awake. So who here understands the relevance and the resonance of Zionism? Yes?
Yay.
All right. Who here understands the power of Zionism?
Yay!
Who here believes in the story of Zionism?
Yay!
All right, so the power, there's the law of the perfect pendulum, which states that when you drop a pendulum from a height and it swings, it never again reaches that same height. And a college professor was teaching this to his students. And he said to them, do you believe in the law of the pendulum? They said yes. He said, do you understand the law of the pendulum? They said yes. And he took a pendulum, a little small one, and he draws with chalk where he drops it from, and it swings and it doesn't reach the height. And he says, you believe in the law of the pendulum? They say yes. So he takes a brave student from the front of the room. He places him on a chair. He places the chair on the desk, and he pulls off a sheet and uncovers a huge pendulum, a 300-pound weight hanging from a steel beam. And he holds it up and brings it to the student's nose. And he says, do you believe in the law of the pendulum? The student says yes. He says, do you understand the law of the pendulum? The student says yes. So he drops the weight. And it swings, and right before it swings back, the student runs off the chair. The teacher looks at the class and said, did he believe in the law of the pendulum? The class, of course, says no. From this, we see that the real indicator of our beliefs, of our knowledge of what we know, is only seen through the actions that we take. So that's why I'm very excited with that wonderful opening to talk about action today. So the question I would like to start with is, why is the perception of Zionism so detached from the reality? How is it that a movement that was once universally known as an aspiration towards morality and beauty is now wholesale condemned as the opposite? The topic of this talk, defining Zionism, reality versus perception, and I want to make sure I address that, but I also want to talk about action. I realize the larger question is not how do we define Zionism, rather it's what are we doing to define Zionism? What actions are we taking? And perhaps to be more cynical, but perhaps also more honest and more accurate, why is the Jewish community failing to define Zionism in a proactive and effective way? So I want to take a few moments first to share how I see Zionism and how I relate to it. So Zionism is a philosophy, it's a movement, and it's a vision for the future. It's a set of ideals and a series of aspirations. It's ideology, but for me it's also identity. It's both a way of thinking and it's a way of life. I like to say that it's the lighthouse and the ship. It's really a journey, but it's also the destination. To be more prosaic, Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination, as we've heard in our historic homeland. It's a revolutionary movement predicated on fundamental human rights of freedom, justice, and equality, language we also actually hear in the BDS movement. To be more specific, though, Zionism is a moral, compassionate, and humanitarian movement. It's the self-liberation movement, which sought not only to reestablish the Jew in their sovereign indigenous homeland, but to reestablish the Jewish people, period. To be more poetic, Zionism is a triumph of the human spirit. It stands as proof that the implausible is not only possible, not only probable, but with enough effort, it's inevitable. It is a testament to the power of peoplehood. Zionism is emancipation and it is empowerment. It's self-actualization and redemption. It is hope, not only liberation of a land, but it's the liberation of a people. And it's a story that transcends politics, and that's why I think it's a story that we need to tell. Yes, I understand that it is a particular story. It's a particularistic story about a particular people. But I think that it's from the particular that arises the universal. It's like we all fall in love with a certain character from a film or from a book. We identify with that particularity. Zionism is a story that truly illustrates the shared humanity of triumph and of challenge, of self-doubt and the search for dignity. People relate to this story. They relate to the anxiety, the fear, the need to belong, the kindling of a few remaining sparks of hope in a twilight, hoping to get redemption in the dawn. It is up there with the greatest literature of our age, and in this way, it's a story that demands to be told. But you all know this. Everyone in this room, you all raised your hands. You're deeply aware of the personality, the power, and the poignancy of Zionism. That's why we're all here. So I don't think the question is how do we define Zionism? Again, I think it's a question of action, as was stated earlier. The question is what are we going to do to define Zionism? As we all know, the prevailing perception of Zionism is antithetical to the reality of what it actually is. I frequently find myself in anti-Zionist circles in my political organizing as a Democrat, in the work that I do when I attend conferences and on social media. And we all know what the placards have to say about the Z word. It ain't pretty, and it's a story that they're telling day and day and day again. Zionism is just that. First and foremost, it's a story. I like to point out that Theodor Herzl, the father of political Zionism, was a playwright. He was an author, he wrote books, he created characters. He created the story of Zionism before it was anything else. And he told that story over and over and over again. He told a story that instructed and inspired a people, that instilled hope, but that also gave a formula on which to act on that hope. It has inspired and oppressed people all around the world to forge new futures and to realize their potential. So my question is, why haven't we followed in Herzl's footsteps? Why haven't we been telling our story? Others certainly are filling this void that we've left. Rather than respond constructively to what's being said about Zionism by telling a better story, I find that we often don't tell anything at all. We attack a story that's being told, or we just change the conversation. The official Chicago Dyke March statement that came out about not allowing Zionists to march with them mentioned Zionism a total of 9 times, all of course in a negative light. My question is, do we typically talk about Zionism that much in our own pro-Israel circles? Aside from this conference, how many conferences do we go to? How many conversations do we have where Zionism is really at the forefront? Most anti-Israel conferences I go to, in fact, have more conversations, have more sessions on Zionism than most of the pro-Israel conferences that I attend. What is with this? Most delegitimizers of Israel are bigger consumers of Zionism than the advocates. I think because of this, we've really taken the heart out of our advocacy. We throw so many talking points and so many textbooks at kids these days that they just walk away. Israel advocacy is mutating from a passion to a pain. The sense of self for Israel advocates is eroding. The sense of meaning, of purpose is disappearing. I participated in countless pro-Israel trips and conferences as a student, and I can't remember one moment where I was seriously offered an opportunity to wrestle with the magnificence of Zionism, to study the literature, to learn the philosophy, to fall in love with the story of our people. I was taught how to respond to other stories. I was never taught my own story, let alone how to actually tell it to others. I didn't go to college to become a political operative. Like many of you, I came to college to find myself and to find my purpose. Zionism is a story that honestly helped me to do that, to find out who I was, what my place was in the world, and what I wanted to do with my life. Zionism is a story that resonates. It resonates with students, with progressives, with young Jews, with Americans of all politics, of all stripes. It's really a story that resonates, and I think that's why anti-Israel groups have attached themselves to it, why they spend so much time attacking it. For those who haven't seen The Dark Knight, the Batman movie, forgive the analogy, but for me, I really think Zionism is our white knight. It's our ace in the hole. And just like the Joker, the other side is trying to bring it down a level. The theory is to corrupt the eminently uncorruptible. If you destroy the symbol, you win. If we take away the compass, the North Star from the Jewish people, perhaps they'll be directionless. Our response must be to fortify the symbol, not to forfeit it, and not to refocus our efforts or our conversations elsewhere. When will we stop allowing others to write our story? Zionism once put the pen back into the hands of the Jewish people, demanded that we become narrators of our own lives. Yet, it seems that we've ceded that pen at times to our enemies. We've relegated ourselves to mere characters, acting in the role of someone else's story of anti-Zionism. We haven't told our own. We're so often confused and distracted in our advocacy. It's reactive, it's frequently quite crisis-driven. Rather than eschew the Z word, I think we need to embrace it, to cultivate it, to nurture it, to grow it again as Hadassah is doing, as Ellen talked about. The reason the word Zionism is so maligned is not because it's inadequate. It's because it is powerful beyond all measure. The perception of Zionism is not to be feared. The beauty of Zionism, the reality of Zionism is to be embraced. Zionism is our what, it is our how, and it is our why. It tells the story not only of our people, but of all peoples. And it's a story that we need to re-energize. It gives meaning to disengaged Jews. It works in our advocacy messages. I think our community needs to spend more time wrestling with the philosophy and the values of Zionism rather than just reading talking points about BDS. Advocacy through the lens of Zionism allows us to become our own narrators again. It gives us our role as protagonists in our own story once more. So I end where I started. What are we going to do to reclaim this symbol? How will we reaffirm the reality of Zionism, to humanize it? What can we do to cultivate a positive identity within our community, among our activists, and especially our youth? When will we focus on telling the dream of the Zionist reality rather than just battling the perception of it? I had a phone call last night with the youngest elected official in Brooklyn, a 22-year-old Hasidic Jew from Borough Park, who's a district leader. And he said that he was stalking my Facebook a little bit, and he saw that I was a Zionist. And he couldn't believe that I was involved in the Democratic Party and organizing as a Zionist. He's an elected Democratic official, but he won't tell others that he's a Zionist. He won't say that at fundraisers or at events. And he was amazed that I had the confidence to do that. And I think that if we're able to tell this story more, if we're able to encourage our youth to fall in love with Zionism so they're willing to stand up as Zionists, that's what we need to do. It's not more talking points, it's not more textbooks, it's really learning to fall in love with our story once more. So at the beginning I asked, do you believe in the relevance, in the resonance, in the power, the poignancy, and the beauty of Zionism? And you all said yes. So as I said, the only indicator of what we actually believe is if we act on it. So today I ask all of you to act on that together. Thank you.